The horse appeared out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning in April 1881, when Delilah Dresden was hanging laundry in the dry Texas wind, and she knew immediately that something about this day would change everything. She stood perfectly still as the massive bay gelding walked right up to her porch steps and stopped, its reins trailing in the dust, its flanks covered in the kind of sweat that came from a hard ride. The animal was magnificent, well-muscled and clearly well cared for, with a saddle that spoke of quality craftsmanship and saddlebags that bulged with supplies. But there was no rider, and that was strange enough to make Delilah set down her basket of wet clothes and approach the animal slowly. "Where did you come from?" she asked softly, reaching out to stroke the horse's velvety nose. The gelding nickered and pushed its head against her palm as if seeking comfort. She could see the brand on its flank, unfamiliar to her but clearly professional work. This was no wild Mustang. This was someone's prized possession, and somewhere out there, someone was probably looking for him. Delilah lived alone on the outskirts of Tascosa, Texas, in a small house her father had built before he died 2 years earlier. At 22, she had turned down 3 marriage proposals from local ranchers and shopkeepers, choosing instead to support herself by taking in sewing and laundry from the townspeople. It was not an easy life, but it was hers, and she had learned to value her independence above almost everything else. Her mother had died when Delilah was young, and her father had raised her to be practical, capable, and unafraid of hard work. The horse whinnied again, and Delilah made a decision. She led the animal to her small stable, which currently housed only her old mule, Jasper. The mule eyed the newcomer with suspicion, but Delilah spoke soothingly to both animals as she removed the saddle and bridle, noting the initials MC tooled into the leather. She rubbed the horse down carefully, checking for injuries, and found nothing more serious than general exhaustion. After giving the gelding water and some of her precious supply of oats, she returned to the house to wait. She did not have to wait long. The sun was climbing toward noon when she heard the sound of boots on her porch. The knock was firm but not aggressive, and when she opened the door, she found herself looking up at one of the tallest men she had ever seen. He was dark-haired and dark-eyed, with a face that was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all sharp angles and sun-weathered skin. He wore dusty range clothes and a hat that had seen better days, and there was a wariness in his expression that spoke of someone who had learned not to trust easily. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and carried the slight drawl of someone who had spent time in the deep South. "I am looking for my horse. Big bay gelding, about 16 hands, answers to the name Dakota. Someone in town said they saw him heading this direction." "He is in my stable," Delilah said, studying the stranger's face. Up close, she could see the worry lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "He showed up here about 3 hours ago, completely riderless. I was concerned he might have thrown you." The man's shoulders relaxed slightly. "No, madam. I was camped about 5 miles south of here, and when I woke up this morning, Dakota had slipped his hobbles and wandered off. I have been tracking him since dawn." He paused, then added, "I am much obliged to you for taking him in. Some folks would have just turned him loose or claimed him for themselves." "I am not some folks," Delilah said simply. "Come around to the stable. He seemed tired, so I gave him water and feed. I hope that was all right." "More than all right," the man said, following her around the side of the house. "That was downright kind of you." In the stable, the reunion between man and horse was surprisingly touching. Dakota whinnied the moment he saw his owner and thrust his head over the stall door, nearly knocking the man's hat off in his enthusiasm. The stranger laughed, the sound transforming his stern face into something warmer, younger, and wrapped both arms around the horse's neck. "You scared me half to death, you damned fool animal," he murmured against Dakota's mane. "What were you thinking, running off like that?" Delilah found herself smiling at the obvious affection between them. He must have been chasing something, a mare perhaps, or following a scent on the wind. "More likely he smelled your cooking and decided to invite himself to breakfast," the man said, turning to face her. "I am being rude. My name is Mason Calloway. I am a horse breeder out of New Mexico Territory, heading to Amarillo on business." "Delilah Dresden," she replied, extending her hand. His grip was firm and warm, and she noticed the calluses that spoke of hard physical work. "And I am afraid Dakota was disappointed if he was expecting breakfast. I have not cooked anything yet today except coffee." "Coffee sounds like heaven right about now," Mason said, then seemed to catch himself. "But I have already imposed on your kindness enough. If you will tell me what I owe you for the feed and care, I will be on my way." "You do not owe me anything," Delilah said. "But you are welcome to some coffee before you go. You look like you have been walking for hours." Mason hesitated, clearly weighing his options, then nodded. "That is very kind of you, Miss Dresden. I would appreciate that." They sat at her small kitchen table, and Delilah poured coffee from the pot she kept warm on the stove. Mason drank deeply, closing his eyes in appreciation, and she found herself studying him more carefully. He was probably in his mid-20s, with the kind of lean, muscular build that came from years of working with horses. His hands, wrapped around the tin cup, were strong but gentle, and she remembered the tenderness with which he had greeted Dakota. "You said you are a horse breeder?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Mason nodded. "My father started the business 20 years ago, breeding working horses for ranchers and cavalry. I took over when he died 3 years back. Dakota here is one of our best studs. I am taking him to a ranch outside Amarillo where they want to improve their stock." "That is a long journey," Delilah observed. "It is," Mason agreed, "but Dakota is worth it. He has the temperament and conformation that every horse breeder dreams of. Smart, strong, and remarkably even-tempered for a stallion." He paused, then added with a slight smile, though apparently not above slipping his hobbles to go wandering when the mood strikes him. "Animals have their own minds," Delilah said. "I think that is what makes them interesting." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily in a way that surprised Delilah. Mason asked about her life in Tascosa, and she found herself telling him about her father, about learning to support herself, about the satisfaction she took in her independence. In turn, he told her about growing up on a ranch in New Mexico, about learning the horse business from his father, about the challenges of maintaining a breeding operation in country that could be harsh and unforgiving. "I should go," Mason finally said, though he sounded reluctant. "I have already lost half a day tracking Dakota, and I need to make up the time." Delilah walked him back to the stable and helped him saddle Dakota, who seemed content now and well rested. Mason checked the girth carefully, then turned to face her. "Thank you again, Miss Dresden. You have been exceptionally kind to a stranger." "You are welcome, Mr. Calloway," she said. "Safe travels to Amarillo." Mason swung into the saddle with easy grace, then looked down at her. For a moment, something passed between them, a recognition of connection that neither of them could quite name. Then he touched his hat and turned Dakota toward the road. Delilah watched them go, expecting to feel nothing more than the mild satisfaction of having done a good deed. Instead, she felt an unexpected hollowness, as if something important was riding away from her. She shook her head at her own foolishness and returned to her laundry, determined to put the encounter out of her mind. But Mason Calloway was not so easily forgotten. 3 days later, she was surprised to see Dakota and his rider coming up her path again. This time, Mason was leading a second horse, a pretty chestnut mare with a white blaze. Delilah set down the shirt she was mending and went to the door, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I thought you would be halfway to Amarillo by now." Mason dismounted, and she could see color rising in his face. "I got about 10 miles down the road and realized I had left my good canteen here. At least, that is what I told myself. The truth is, Miss Dresden, I could not stop thinking about you, and I decided that was a sign I should not ignore." Delilah felt her own cheeks warming. "You came back." "I did," Mason said, "and I brought you something. A thank-you gift for taking care of Dakota." He gestured to the chestnut mare. "This is Sunrise. She is one of our breeding mares, gentle as a lamb and smart as they come. I thought she might be useful to you, better than that old mule for getting into town." Delilah stared at him in shock. "I cannot accept that. She must be worth a fortune." "She is worth what I say she is worth," Mason said firmly. "And to me, she is worth the kindness you showed to a stranger and his horse. Please, Miss Dresden, it would make me happy to know you had her." Delilah looked at the mare, who was indeed beautiful, then back at Mason. "On one condition," she said. "You stop calling me Miss Dresden. My name is Delilah." Mason's face broke into a genuine smile. "Then you have to call me Mason." "All right, Mason," she said, testing the name on her tongue. "I accept your gift, thank you." "There is one more thing," Mason said, and now he looked almost nervous. "I do not have to be in Amarillo for another 2 weeks. The rancher is not expecting me until then. I was wondering if you might allow me to camp nearby for a few days. There is good grazing by that creek I passed about a 1/4 mile back, and I could help you with any work you need done around here. I am handy with repairs, and I noticed your fence could use some mending." Delilah knew she should say no. She knew that allowing a man she barely knew to stay nearby was the kind of thing that would set tongues wagging in Tascosa. But when she looked at Mason, at the hope and uncertainty in his dark eyes, she found herself nodding. "The fence does need work," she said. "And there is a leak in my roof I have been meaning to fix. If you are willing to help with that, you are welcome to camp by the creek." The relief on Mason's face was palpable. "I will start on the fence first thing tomorrow morning." He was as good as his word. Delilah woke the next day to find Mason already at work on the fence line. His shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His hat pushed back on his head as he focused on replacing a rotted post. She brought him coffee and biscuits for breakfast, and he thanked her with a smile that made her stomach flutter in a way she had never experienced before. Over the next week, a routine developed between them. Mason worked on repairs during the day, and Delilah found herself looking for excuses to bring him water or food, to check on his progress, to simply talk with him. In the evenings, after she finished her sewing work, Mason would come to the house and they would sit on the porch, talking as the sun set over the Texas plains. She learned that Mason had never married, that he had been engaged once, but the woman had broken it off when she realized how isolated ranch life would be. She learned that his mother had died when he was young, like hers, and that his father had been a hard but fair man who had taught him everything about horses and integrity. She learned that he loved to read, that he had a surprising knowledge of poetry, that he played the harmonica and could make Dakota dance to the music. In turn, she told him about her dreams of someday opening a dress shop in town, about her fear of losing her independence if she married, about the loneliness that sometimes crept up on her in the evening when the house felt too quiet. Mason listened to all of it with an attention that made her feel truly heard, truly seen, in a way she had never experienced before. You should not have to choose between independence and companionship, Mason said one evening. The right partner would support your dreams, not try to take them away. Is that what you would do? Delilah asked, then immediately felt embarrassed by her boldness. Mason looked at her steadily. If I were lucky enough to have a partner like you, I would do everything in my power to make sure she had everything she needed to thrive. Her happiness would be my happiness. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Delilah found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something she could not name. Mason reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, and the simple touch sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "Delilah," he said softly, "I know we have only known each other a week. I know this is probably too fast, too soon, but I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You are smart and strong and kind, and being near you feels like coming home." "I feel it too," Delilah whispered. "I thought I was content with my solitary life, but you have shown me what I was missing." Mason lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I do not want to leave for Amarillo, but I gave my word to the rancher, and my business depends on my reputation." "I know," Delilah said, though her heart was sinking. "When do you have to go?" "Tomorrow," Mason said. "I have put it off as long as I can, but Delilah, I will come back. I promise you that. As soon as my business is concluded, I will come back to Tascosa." "How long will you be gone?" "A month, maybe 6 weeks at most. I have to deliver Dakota, help the rancher understand his care and breeding protocols, and then make the journey back." A month felt like an eternity, but Delilah nodded. "I will be here." That night, neither of them wanted to say goodbye. They sat on the porch until the stars came out, hands clasped, shoulders touching, speaking in low voices about everything and nothing. When Mason finally stood to return to his camp, he cupped Delilah's face gently in both hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked. In answer, Delilah rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise and longing, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Come back to me," Delilah said. "Nothing could keep me away," Mason promised. He left at dawn the next morning, and Delilah stood on her porch watching until he and Dakota disappeared over the horizon. Then she went back inside her suddenly too quiet house and tried to figure out how she was going to survive the next month without him. The days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Delilah threw herself into her work, taking on extra sewing projects, reorganizing her entire house, riding Sunrise into town more often than necessary just to have something to do. But no matter how busy she kept herself, her thoughts always returned to Mason. She wondered where he was, whether he was thinking of her, whether he would truly come back as he had promised. The women in town noticed the change in her. Mrs. Peterson, whose husband ran the general store, commented on the glow in Delilah's cheeks when she came in to buy thread. Young Emma Martinez, whose wedding dress Delilah was sewing, teased her about the faraway look in her eyes. Delilah deflected their questions, but could not quite hide her smiles when they pressed her about whether she had met someone. 3 weeks after Mason left, a terrible dust storm rolled through Tascosa. Delilah secured her animals and shuttered her windows, but she could not stop thinking about Mason somewhere out there on the trail. She prayed he had found shelter, that he and Dakota were safe. The storm lasted 2 days, coating everything in a fine layer of grit and leaving her anxious and exhausted. When the storm finally cleared, Delilah rode Sunrise into town to check on the damage and pick up supplies. The main street was a mess of debris, and several buildings had lost shingles or shutters. She was tying Sunrise outside the general store when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "That is a mighty fine horse you have there, miss." Delilah spun around, her heart leaping, and there was Mason, dusty and tired but grinning at her like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever said. Without thinking, she ran to him and threw her arms around his neck. Mason caught her, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around, his laughter mixing with hers. "You are back early," she said when he finally set her down. "I was not expecting you for at least another week." "I finished my business faster than I expected," Mason said, keeping his arms around her waist. "And I might have ridden a little harder than was strictly necessary to get back here. I missed you, Delilah, every single day." "I missed you too," she admitted, "more than I thought possible." They were standing in the middle of the street, and Delilah became aware of people watching them, of the whispers starting to spread. But she found she did not care. Mason was back, and that was all that mattered. "Come home with me," she said. "You must be exhausted." Mason retrieved his new horse, a sturdy sorrel gelding he introduced as Ranger, and they rode back to Delilah's house together. Once there, Delilah insisted he wash up and eat before they talked. She heated water for him and prepared a meal of stew and fresh bread, watching with satisfaction as he ate 3 bowls and half a loaf. When he was finally fed and clean, they returned to their spots on the porch, the familiar routine settling over them like a comfortable blanket. But there was a new energy between them now, a sense of anticipation that made Delilah's skin tingle. "I did a lot of thinking while I was gone," Mason said, taking her hand. "About you, about us, about what I want my future to look like. And Delilah, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. I want to spend my life with you." Delilah's breath caught. "Mason, let me finish," he said gently. "I know you value your independence. I know you have dreams of opening a dress shop. I would never ask you to give those things up. But I think we could build something together, something that honors both of our dreams. I could move my breeding operation here, to Tascosa. There is good grazing land available, and I have saved enough money to start building. You could have your shop in town, and we could have a ranch where we raise the finest horses in Texas, together. You would move your entire business here. For me, I would move heaven and earth for you," Mason said simply. "But yes, I would move my business. New Mexico does not feel like home anymore. Home is wherever you are." Delilah felt tears pricking her eyes. "I love you, Mason Calloway. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you with Dakota, the way you cared for him. And every day since has only made me more certain." "Is that a yes?" Mason asked, hope blazing in his eyes. "That is a yes to everything," Delilah said. "Yes to building a life together. Yes to the ranch and the shop and all of it. Yes to you." Mason pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Delilah felt like she was finally, truly home. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Tascosa. Emma Martinez and her new husband stood up as witnesses, and Mrs. Peterson provided the cake. It was simple and perfect, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Delilah felt a joy so complete it almost frightened her. Mason had already purchased land on the outskirts of town and started building their house. It was bigger than Delilah's current home, with a spacious bedroom, a real kitchen, and a parlor where she could receive customers for her sewing business until the shop was ready. Behind the house, Mason was constructing stables and paddocks for his horses, which were being transported from New Mexico by his former ranch hands. The first months of marriage were an adventure in learning to share space and lives. Mason was an early riser who liked to be out with the horses by dawn, while Delilah preferred to sleep a bit later and work into the evening on her sewing. They learned to compromise, to communicate, to appreciate each other's rhythms and routines. There were disagreements, of course. Mason could be stubborn when he thought he was right, and Delilah had a temper when pushed too far. But they always talked things through, always came back to the love that anchored them. The breeding business flourished. Mason's reputation for quality horses spread throughout Texas, and soon ranchers were coming from hundreds of miles away to purchase his stock. Delilah helped with the bookkeeping and correspondence, discovering she had a talent for the business side of things. She also continued her sewing, building up her clientele until she had enough regular customers to justify opening the shop she had always dreamed of. In the spring of 1882, almost exactly a year after Dakota first wandered up to her door, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She told Mason one evening after dinner, watching nervously as the news sank in. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He whooped with joy, picked her up carefully, and spun her in a gentle circle before setting her down and dropping to his knees to press his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I am your father, and I already love you more than you can imagine." Delilah ran her fingers through his dark hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had stumbled into her life because his horse had wandered off. "We are going to have a baby," she said wonderingly. "We are going to have a family," Mason corrected, looking up at her with shining eyes. Their son was born in December of that year, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him Samuel, after Mason's father, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he had both of his parents wrapped around his tiny fingers. Mason was an attentive, loving father, walking the floor with Samuel when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, singing soft lullabies in his deep voice. Delilah had worried that motherhood might mean giving up her shop, but Mason would not hear of it. He hired a young woman from town, Sarah Thompson, to help with the baby during the hours Delilah worked. Sarah was wonderful with Samuel, and Delilah found she could balance both roles more easily than she had feared. Mason often brought the baby to the shop during his lunch hour, and the sight of her tall, rough cowboy husband cradling their tiny son never failed to make her heart melt. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch grew, with more horses, more employees, more responsibility. Delilah's shop became one of the most popular in Tascosa, known for both the quality of her work and the fairness of her prices. Samuel grew from a baby into a toddler, then into a bright, curious little boy who loved horses almost as much as his father did. On Samuel's third birthday, Mason surprised Delilah with the news that he had purchased the land adjacent to their ranch, doubling their holdings. "I want to build something lasting," he told her. "Something we can pass down to Samuel and any other children we might have." "Other children?" Delilah said, raising an eyebrow. "Samuel kept them plenty busy as it was." Mason grinned. "Well, maybe, if you are amenable to the idea." As it turned out, Delilah was quite amenable. Their daughter, Rose, was born in the fall of 1886, a delicate little thing with Mason's dark eyes and a powerful set of lungs. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes. Watching him gently stroke her soft hair, Delilah felt her heart might burst from happiness. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Samuel learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, showing a natural affinity for horses that delighted his father. Rose proved to be more interested in her mother's sewing, often sitting quietly by Delilah's side as she worked, watching with intense concentration. In 1889, they welcomed another son, Thomas, who seemed to inherit the best qualities of both his parents. Mason's calm patience and Delilah's fierce determination. Through it all, Mason and Delilah's love only deepened. They still made time for each other, still sat on the porch in the evenings talking and holding hands, still looked at each other with the wonder of people who could not quite believe their good fortune. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mason took Delilah to San Antonio for a week, leaving the children with Sarah and her husband, who now managed much of the day-to-day ranch operations. "You remember the day Dakota wandered up to your door?" Mason asked as they walked along the San Antonio River, fingers intertwined. "How could I forget?" Delilah said. "It was the day my whole life changed." "Mine too," Mason said. "I used to wonder why Dakota slipped his hobbles that morning. It was so unlike him. But now I think maybe he knew something I did not. Maybe he was leading me exactly where I needed to go." "To me," Delilah said softly. "To you," Mason confirmed. "To home." They renewed their vows that week, just the two of them and a priest, reaffirming the promises they had made 10 years earlier. When they returned to Tascosa, they found the ranch running smoothly and their children happy and healthy. Samuel, now almost 9, had taken over many of the basic stable chores and was beginning to help train the younger horses. Rose, at 5, had sewn her first piece under Sarah's supervision, a wonky little pillowcase she presented to her mother with immense pride. Thomas, barely 2, toddled around getting into everything and charming everyone he met. The 1890s brought new challenges. A drought in 1893 tested the ranch's resources, forcing Mason to make difficult decisions about which horses to keep and which to sell. Delilah's shop weathered a brief downturn when a competitor opened across the street, but her loyal customers stayed true, and the other shop eventually closed. Through it all, they supported each other, drawing strength from their partnership. In 1895, Samuel turned 13 and started talking about his future. He wanted to expand the breeding operation, to experiment with crossing different bloodlines to create even stronger, smarter horses. Mason listened to his ideas with respect, recognizing his own younger self in his son's enthusiasm. Together, they started planning for the future, for the day when Samuel would take over the ranch. Rose, at 11, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to be a doctor. It was an unusual ambition for a girl, especially in a small Texas town. But Delilah and Mason had raised their children to believe they could do anything they set their minds to. They began investigating medical schools that accepted women, determined to support their daughters' dreams just as they supported each other's. Thomas, at 7, was still figuring out his path, but he showed signs of having inherited his mother's head for business. He was always tallying things, calculating costs and profits from the ranch operations, asking thoughtful questions about pricing and markets. Dakota, the horse who had started it all, was still alive at 18 years old, now retired from breeding but still vigorous and healthy. He spent his days grazing in the paddock closest to the house, often with Samuel's younger siblings climbing on him with the patience of a beloved family pet. Mason visited him every day, bringing treats and spending quiet moments with the animal who had changed his life. "You did good, old friend," Mason would tell him, stroking the horse's graying muzzle. "You brought me to exactly where I needed to be." In 1897, tragedy struck when Sarah's husband died in a riding accident. Delilah and Mason immediately took Sarah and her 2 children into their home, giving them a place to heal and grieve. Sarah had become like family over the years, and it felt natural to support her through this difficult time. Eventually, she moved into the foreman's cottage on the ranch, continuing to help manage operations and raising her children alongside the Calloways. The turn of the century found the Calloway ranch thriving. Samuel, now 18, was officially made a partner in the business, bringing fresh ideas and youthful energy. Rose had been accepted to the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, one of the few medical schools that accepted female students, and would be leaving in the fall. Thomas, at 12, was already keeping the ranch books with an efficiency that impressed even his mother. On a warm evening in June 1900, the entire family gathered on the expanded porch for dinner. It had become a tradition, these Sunday evening meals where everyone came together to share food and stories and laughter. Samuel talked about a new mare he was training. Rose described the anatomy textbook she had been studying. Thomas presented his latest calculations showing increased profits from a change in feed suppliers. Delilah watched them all with pride, then looked at Mason at the other end of the table. He caught her eye and smiled, the same smile that had made her heart flutter 19 years ago. She smiled back, thinking about the improbable chain of events that had brought them here. A horse slipping his hobbles, a stranger at her door, a decision to open her heart when she had been determined to guard it. After dinner, when the children had scattered to their various activities, Mason found Delilah in her sewing room, working on a dress for Rose to take to medical school. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliriously," Delilah said, leaning back against him. "You, more than I ever thought possible," Mason said. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that you are my wife, that we built all of this together." "Dakota deserves some of the credit," Delilah teased. "Dakota deserves all the credit," Mason said seriously. "If he had not wandered off that morning, I would have ridden right past Tascosa, past you, past everything that matters most to me in this world." Delilah turned in his arms to face him. Even after nearly 2 decades together, the sight of him still made her breath catch. There was silver in his hair now, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the Texas sun, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "I love you, Mason Calloway," she said. "More today than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow." "I love you too, Delilah Calloway," he replied, and kissed her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. The years continued to roll forward. Rose went off to medical school, writing long letters home about her studies and the challenges of being one of only a handful of women in her program. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from Amarillo, a spirited young woman named Catherine who fit into the family as if she had always been there. Thomas started talking about going to business school, about learning modern methods of accounting and finance. In 1903, Samuel and Catherine welcomed the first grandchild, a baby girl they named Delilah after her grandmother. When they placed the tiny bundle in Delilah's arms, she wept with joy, marveling at the continuation of the family she and Mason had built. Mason stood beside her, one arm around her shoulders, looking at his granddaughter with the same wonder he had shown when holding his own children for the first time. Dakota passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1904, at the impressive age of 27. Mason found him in the morning, lying in his favorite sunny spot in the paddock, looking as if he had simply decided it was time to rest. The entire family mourned him, understanding that he had been so much more than just a horse. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, marking the grave with a simple stone that read, "Dakota." He knew the way home. Rose graduated from medical school in 1905 and returned to Texas, setting up a practice in Tascosa. She was the first female doctor many of the townspeople had ever seen, and while there was some initial resistance, her skill and compassion quickly won people over. She married another doctor, a kind man named James Foster, who supported her career completely, and they built a life together serving the community. Thomas went to business school in Chicago, then surprised everyone by falling in love with the city. He opened a business there, helping Western ranchers and farmers find markets for their goods in the urban centers of the East. He visited often, always bringing stories of the modern world that was emerging, of automobiles and electric lights and tall buildings made of steel. Samuel and Catherine had 3 more children, filling the ranch with the sounds of young voices and laughter. The breeding operation continued to grow, gaining a reputation that stretched from Texas to California. Samuel implemented new techniques he had learned from studying veterinary science, and the Calloway horses became known as the finest working animals money could buy. Through all the changes and growth, Mason and Delilah remained the heart of the family. They were consulted on major decisions, sought out for advice and wisdom, but they had also learned to step back and let their children make their own choices, their own mistakes, their own triumphs. They had raised independent, capable people, and they took pride in watching them flourish. In 1910, on their 29th wedding anniversary, Mason surprised Delilah with a trip back to San Antonio, retracing the journey they had made 20 years earlier. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their bodies bearing the marks of decades of hard work and full lives. But walking along the river, hand in hand, they felt as young as they had on their wedding day. "If you could go back," Mason said, "knowing everything that was going to happen, all the hard times along with the good, would you still say yes when I asked you to build a life with me?" Delilah did not even have to think about it. "I would say yes 1,000 times over." "You are the best decision I ever made," Mason Calloway. "Even better than taking in that stray horse," Mason teased. "That stray horse brought me you," Delilah said. So really, it was the same decision. They renewed their vows again that trip, making it a tradition for every decade of marriage. Standing before the same priest who had married them 20 years earlier, an old man now with shaking hands, they promised to love and cherish each other for whatever time they had left. The 1910s brought the modern world closer to Tascosa. Automobiles started appearing on the streets. Telegraph lines connected the town to the wider world. The isolation that had once defined frontier life was slowly eroding, replaced by connectivity and change. But the Calloway Ranch remained a constant, adapting when necessary but holding fast to the values that had always defined it: hard work, integrity, quality, and family. In 1915, war broke out in Europe, and though America was not yet involved, everyone could feel the tension in the air. Samuel's oldest son, now 17, talked about enlisting if America joined the fighting. It terrified Catherine and worried Samuel, but they all remembered the lessons Mason and Delilah had taught. Support your family's choices, even when they are hard. Mason and Delilah celebrated their 35th anniversary in 1916 with a huge party at the ranch. All of their children and grandchildren gathered, along with friends from town, ranch employees past and present, and customers who had become friends over the years. Sarah, now in her 60s and running her own successful boarding house in town, came with her grown children and grandchildren. Emma Martinez, Delilah's first bride, attended with her husband and their large, boisterous family. As the party wound down and the sun set over the Texas plains, Mason and Delilah found themselves alone on the porch, watching the last guests depart. It was the same porch where they had first held hands, first kissed, first dreamed about the future. So much had changed, but in all the ways that mattered, everything was exactly as it should be. 35 years, Delilah marveled. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like we just met yesterday. I know exactly what you mean, Mason said. He was 70 now, his hair completely white, his movements a bit slower than they once were, but his eyes still held the same warmth and love they always had. Every morning I wake up next to you and feel grateful all over again. We have built something good here, Delilah said, looking out at the ranch, at the stables and paddocks, at the house that had sheltered their family and their dreams. Something lasting. We have, Mason agreed, but the best thing we built is not the ranch or the business or even this house. It is us, Delilah. This partnership, this love, this life we share. That is what I am most proud of. Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Somewhere in the stables, a horse whinnied, the sound carrying on the evening breeze. It made them both smile, thinking of Dakota, of the incredible series of events that had brought them together. In 1917, America entered the war, and Samuel's oldest son did enlist, serving with honor and returning home safely in 1919. Rose's medical practice was busier than ever, serving the community through the war years and the terrible influenza epidemic that followed. Thomas's business in Chicago helped keep the ranch profitable even during the economic disruptions of wartime. Mason and Delilah grew older, moving a bit slower, but still sharp in mind and passionate about their family and their work. Mason still visited the stables every day, though he left the actual training and breeding to Samuel and his sons now. Delilah still sewed, though she had officially retired from the shop years earlier, leaving it to a former apprentice who maintained her standards of quality. In 1920, they celebrated their 40th anniversary with another renewal of vows, this time surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The family had grown so large that the celebration required setting up tables in the yard, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air like music. Rose, now a respected doctor with silver threads in her dark hair, gave a toast. "To my parents," she said, raising her glass. "You taught us what love looks like in action. Not just romantic love, though you certainly had that, but the love of commitment, of partnership, of choosing each other every single day. You showed us that building a life together does not mean giving up your individual dreams, but rather supporting each other in achieving them. Everything we have, everything we are, comes from the foundation you built. Thank you." There was not a dry eye in the crowd as everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Mason and Delilah stood together, arms around each other, overwhelmed by the abundance of love surrounding them. The 1920s roared into being with change and innovation everywhere. But on the Calloway ranch, the rhythms remained much the same. Horses being born and trained, seasons turning, family gathering. Samuel ran the breeding operation now with his sons, maintaining the reputation for quality that Mason had established. The business thrived, adapting to changing times but never compromising on the standards that had made the Calloway name synonymous with excellence. Mason's health began to decline in 1924. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual wearing down that came with age. He was 78 now, and his body was finally demanding the rest he had never been willing to give it. Delilah, at 74, was in better health, but she could feel her own energy waning. They spent more time sitting on the porch together, watching the ranch they had built continue to thrive under their children's care. One evening, in early spring of 1925, as they sat watching the sunset, Mason turned to Delilah with a serious expression. "I want you to promise me something," he said. "Anything," Delilah replied, though his tone worried her. "When I am gone, I do not want you to stop living. I want you to keep sewing, keep spending time with the grandchildren, keep being the vibrant, passionate woman I fell in love with. Promise me you will not just fade away. Mason Calloway, do not talk like that, Delilah said, tears stinging her eyes. We have to talk about it eventually, Mason said gently. We have had 44 years together, Delilah, 44 incredible, wonderful years. That is more than most people ever get, but nothing lasts forever, and I need to know you will be all right. I will never be all right without you, Delilah said fiercely. You are half my heart. Then live for both of us, Mason said. That is what I need from you. Can you promise me that? Through her tears, Delilah nodded. I promise, but you have to promise me something too. Promise me you will fight to stay with me as long as you can. I am not ready to let you go. I promise, Mason said and pulled her close. I will stay as long as I possibly can. He kept that promise. Through 1925 and 1926, despite growing weakness and increasing pain, Mason remained present and engaged with his family. He held his newest great-grandchild, bouncing the baby gently and singing the same lullabies he had once sung to his own children. He gave advice to Samuel about a difficult breeding decision. He sat with Delilah while she sewed, reading to her from the books they both loved. He lived every day fully, squeezing every drop of joy from the life they had built together. In the spring of 1927, exactly 46 years after Dakota had first wandered up to Delilah's door, Mason Calloway passed away peacefully in his sleep, his hand clasped in Delilah's. He was 81 years old, and he had lived a life filled with love, purpose, and meaning. The funeral was one of the largest Tascosa had ever seen. Ranchers came from across Texas to pay their respects to a man who had helped improve their herds and their livelihoods. Townspeople came to honor a man who had always been fair and generous. But most of all, family came. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them bearing witness to the legacy Mason had left. Delilah stood at the grave with dry eyes, having cried all her tears in private. She listened to the words spoken over her husband's body, heard the stories people told about his kindness and integrity, accepted the condolences offered by dozens of people. And through it all, she felt Mason's presence, as real as the Texas sun on her face. They buried him next to Dakota, on the hill overlooking the ranch. Delilah knew he would have liked that, resting beside the horse that had brought them together. True to her promise, Delilah did not fade away. She mourned deeply and genuinely, but she also kept living. She sewed quilts for each of her grandchildren, embedding memories and love into every stitch. She sat on the porch with her great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the ranch in its early days, about a horse named Dakota who had changed everything. She watched Samuel continue to build the business, taking pride in how well he honored his father's legacy while also making it his own. On what would have been her 50th wedding anniversary in 1931, Delilah gathered the entire family at the ranch. They numbered over 40 now, spanning 4 generations. She had asked them to come because she had something important to say. Your grandfather and I built this ranch together, she told them, her voice still strong despite her 81 years. We built it on love and hard work and the belief that family comes first. We had our share of hardships, but we always faced them together. And the life we created here, the legacy we leave you, is not just this land or these horses. It is the example of what is possible when 2 people commit to building something bigger than themselves. She paused, looking around at all the faces watching her with love and attention. I am telling you this because I want you to remember that every great thing starts with a simple choice. Mason chose to come back after finding Dakota. I chose to let him stay, and every day after that we chose each other. That is what I want for all of you, Do not wait for perfect circumstances. Do not wait until you have everything figured out. When you find someone who makes your heart sing, someone who challenges you to be better, someone who stands beside you through everything, choose them. And keep choosing them every single day. There was silence when she finished. Then Rose stood and embraced her mother, tears streaming down her face. One by one, the others followed, until Delilah was surrounded by the love of her family, the fruit of the choice she and Mason had made so long ago. Delilah lived another 7 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1938 at the age of 88. She was buried between Mason and Dakota, the three of them together on the hill, overlooking the ranch that had started with a wandering horse and a chance encounter. The Calloway Ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's guidance and eventually his children's. The breeding operation remained one of the most respected in the Southwest, still maintaining the standards Mason had established. Rose's medical practice was taken over by her daughter, continuing the family tradition of service. Thomas's business empire grew, but he never forgot his roots, always supporting the ranch and the family. And on the hill overlooking it all, 3 graves stood as a testament to an extraordinary love story. Visitors to the ranch would sometimes ask about them, and whoever was asked would smile and say, "That is where it all started." With a horse named Dakota who wandered off one spring morning and brought 2 people together who were meant to find each other. Because some love stories begin with a grand gesture or a dramatic rescue. But the best ones, the ones that last, sometimes begin with something as simple as a horse stopping at the right door, and 2 people brave enough to see where that moment might lead. Mason and Delilah had taken that chance, and in doing so, they had built not just a life or a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Proof that the smallest moments can change everything, and that choosing love is always, always worth it.